Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermont, and something a little different today. Some time ago I made a two-part video discussing the protagonists of the Soulsborne series, and which of them might come out on top should they battle one another. One part focused on lore, the other on gameplay mechanics. Needless to say, not everyone was infatuated with it, and of course there's no real winner in these sorts of situations as it's all purely hypothetical. That said, I do find these playground battles entertaining to discuss. We won't be talking about the Chosen Undead or the Good Hunter in today's video. Instead, we'll be talking about the main kingdoms of each game. To put it in a nutshell, if Anor Londo waged war against Lothric, who would come out on top? If Boletaria decided to invade Drang Lake, would they conquer or be repelled? Which of these kingdoms has the strongest military, the best commanders and generals? Again, as this is purely hypothetical, there is no realistic winner here, but we'll have a look at each in turn and I'll tell you who I think would come out on top. We'll include King Alant's Boletaria from Demon's Souls, Gwyn's Anor Londo from Dark Souls, Vendrick's Drang Lake from Dark Souls 2, and Lothric from Lothric Souls 3, Prepare to Lothric. First up, let's have a look at each kingdom in turn and break down what they might bring to the table, so to speak. And it's only fair that we start with the first, the northern land of Boletaria.
Do you intend to challenge the king? You may be a great demon hunter, but I fear you may not be ready. The king is defended by the black souls of mighty knights and a fire-breathing dragon. Beware the limits of your own power.
And straight off the bat, if this concept art is anything to go by, it certainly seems to be the largest city. For the sake of this video, we'll be talking open battle on a large field, otherwise Anor Londo would kind of obviously win, because that city is next to impossible to lay siege to given its location on top of a huge mountain. So what does Boletaria bring to the table? The Drangleic and Boletarian soldiers are very similar to the Hollow Warrior and Hollow Soldier enemies you'll find in most of the Souls games. Both come with a variety of weapons, spears, swords, shields, crossbows, and so forth. And of course, as we have no way of knowing exactly how many fighters each kingdom has, let's assume they are roughly the same. If Boletaria has 100 Drangleics, then the others would have 100 Hollow Warriors, and so forth. Boletaria also has the Blue Eye and Red Eye Knights, the bane of many a new player. Red Eyes are generally the stronger of the two, yet both pack a punch and come with a heavy suit of armour and powerful weapons. These are your standard knight enemies, by which many of the others can be compared to. But although they are knights, are they mounted? Never in game, but we do see horses here and there in Boletaria, so I'm going to assume that Boletaria has some form of heavy cavalry. Aside from what appears to be attack dogs, Boletaria also brings the Imperial Spy, an assassin in service to the king. So they've got strength and dex covered, but there's not really much in the way of magic users, unless I suppose we count the fat ministers. Well, so far so good, we're establishing a template here. And next up we have what we can call the generals or commanders of Boletaria, their very own Round Table. The Royal Twin Fangs, Valifax and Bior, Alfred, the Knight of the Tower, Metas, the Knight of the Lance, and the brave tribesman Longbow Ulan and his fearsome legions. Simple enough. The problem here is we have no way of knowing next to anything about these characters. Whilst Alfred might well have turned into the Tower Demon, and you have the possibility of Metas being Penetrator or Phalanx, same with Ulan, do we count these demons with Boletaria's strength? Then there are 3 Black Phantoms you might encounter late in the Boletarian Palace, who rather well match the descriptions of these 3 knights. And whilst in this state they are simply powerful humanoids, who can say if they were stronger before or after being twisted into demons? And leading Boletaria, of course, we have King Alant. Sadly, again, we have no way of knowing how powerful, or not, Alant is. The false king we fight could well be leagues more powerful than the man he's based on, as the only version of Alant we ever fight is just a blob. For the sake of this video though, let us assume that it is Boletaria post-demon invasion, with the False King in charge, as I assume it is more powerful then because, you know, they have the Tower Knight demon and all these demons running around. Next up though, Dark Souls 1.
Let me give you a nibble of advice. Don't even consider visiting Anor Londo. Not in your state. For a century they've tried and failed. The Night King Rendell, Black Iron Tarkus, and even Logan himself. You won't stand a chance, you'll be eaten alive. But go along if you wish, if only to deepen your despair.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if this is the favourite to win for many people. Whilst Anor Londo seems to lack the equivalent of Drangleic and Hollow Soldiers, well, we do encounter Hollow Warriors in the Undeadburg, but I do not believe they are part of the Anor Londo army, so to speak. Perhaps they are drafted in as they are in Lordran, but the City of the Gods doesn't seem too keen on humans. Likewise, I don't think we can include the Witch of Izalith or Nito in this equation. Seath is probably fair game though. That said, do you really need those low-level infantry when your main force is made up of Silver Knights? Primarily using spears and shields, we also have the black variant who use great weapons designed to crush demons. We'll include both, as seems fair, but you've probably noticed Gwyn's army is almost entirely designed to combat dragons and demons. In fairness, the Silver Knights do a good job at butchering players too, and whilst they don't make use of it in game, we know that the Silver Knights of old were able to hurl lightning spears. Imagine having a few hundred of those tossed in your direction. Probably makes a rain of arrows look like a pleasant summer shower. We also have Hawkeye's Dragon Slayers. Are these Silver Knights wielding great bows, or giants wielding great bows? Perhaps a mix of both, but we know for sure that Silver Knights wield them to great effect, and we can't forget Kieran's Assassins, or Lord's Blades. Much like Alant's spies, these deadly women serve the role of assassin. Some believe the Painting Guardians are either the same thing or closely related, but for all intents and purposes they serve a similar role. Assassins. Whilst Anor Londo has no attack dogs or the like, they do have the Batwing Demons. Oh, and we can't forget the Royal Sentinels, can we? Those horrible enemies. Those giants pack one hell of a punch, although not as much as Gwyn's 4 Knights. Unlike Alant's Round Table, we've fought all of Gwyn's 4 Knights. We've fought Ornstein, Artorias, Kieran, and the Hawkeye himself. And thus we have a decent idea of what each is capable of. Each possesses superhuman strength or skill, or strength and skill in some cases. And Goff has a repertoire of bombastic wrestling moves on top of that. Maybe he trained with the blacksmith, come to think of it. Finally, we have Gwyn though. From a gameplay perspective, Alant is perhaps the harder boss, but from a lore perspective, I think there's little doubt that Gwyn is the strongest of the leaders of these games. That said, we don't know too much about his leadership ability or charisma, but we know he has a very big sword and throws sunlight spears about like it's going out of style. So, we've a demon lord and a sunlight god. Next up, a human man who peered into the very essence of the soul.
I am no king. I am more fit to be a jester. I was unaware of my own blindness. We are feeble vessels, with feebler souls. We would cast aside the prop of life, only to face greater hardship. Are you another such fool? Or something more?
And where to start with Drang Lake? Well, let's just list off some of those in Vendrick's forces, shall we? Royal Infantry, Royal Soldiers, Royal Swordsmen, Ironclad Soldiers, Royal Guards, Stone Soldiers, Primal Knights, and Alon Knights. The Varangians are debatable. The game does suggest they are enslaved and forced to work for Drang Lake, but like the Grave Wardens and inhabitants of the Undead Crypt, we'll go ahead and say they don't directly associate with Drang Lake. Same deal with Vengal and the other mercenary characters. Although even without those, Drangleic has a lot of different soldiers and fighters, and what's more, Drangleic has a confirmed cavalry of sorts. The Dragon Riders, or Dragoons as they are known in the Japanese version. Wielding great bows and halberds, they'd make for some fearsome mounted archers and lancers. Of course, they aren't actually riding dragons. Instead, the concept art depicts them riding strange, dinosaur-like beasts. Drangleic also presumably has chariots, judging from the executioner horse found in the castle. And then we have Drangleic's commanders, those that we know of, Sain, Raim, Velstart, and Captain Drummond, to speak of those we can name. Throne Defender and Watcher aren't exactly named per se, but we know of them and we know of their power, to say nothing about Nishandra herself, a fragment of Manus. There's also Chancellor Welliger, and although he wields weapons, who knows if he has any military experience. Finally, there's Vendrick himself. From a gameplay perspective, he's definitely the strongest purely from a numbers perspective. His attacks will one-shot most players, and he has such amazingly high defense that unless you plan on beating him down for a few weeks, you'll need the souls of giants to lower his resistance levels. From a lore perspective, however, it's very hard to say. We only ever fight him as a mindless hollow, but it stands to reason that Vendrick would have been quite powerful in his prime, probably in the same ballpark as Alant and Gwyn, but Alant is a demon puppet, a powerful one, but there's nothing to suggest he is overwhelmingly powerful. Gwyn we only ever fight as a husk, and in his prime we know he was pretty bananas, judging from the opening cinematic, but we don't know if he is more powerful than Manus. I think there's kind of a rock-paper-scissors thing here going on. Whilst Gwyn would probably be able to defeat ancient dragons, Manus probably couldn't, but Manus could still probably defeat Gwyn because Gwyn and most of the lords are weak to humanity, darkness, the occult, and as for Vendrick, there is nothing in Dark Souls 2 suggested or implied really to be more powerful than Vendrick. He is not weak to humanity because, well, he is a human. I do not believe he ran from Nishandra because he was weaker than Nishandra, but rather because he just didn't want to fight her. He is, however, weak to giant souls? I'm not really sure how that works out, but I suppose that would be his elemental weakness. Again, unlike Alant and Gwyn, Vendrick seems to favour military and martial might more than using any magic or miracles. Oh, and speaking of magic...
Ah, unkindled one, the fire fades and awaits its one last lord. Please, Prince Lothric is in your hands. Please save his soul. Tell him what he must be, a lord.
The final and most recent kingdom, Lothric. And let's get right into it, shall we? As with most of the others, they have your standard hollow, Drangleic style soldiers and warriors. Above those, we have Lothric's proud knights, wielding sword, great spear, great sword, and shields. These knights are not only fearsome on foot, but even ride dragons, or at least wyverns. We never see them on them, but I think it's fair to say that they were riding drakes very similar to those we see flying around Lothric now and then. Perhaps slightly smaller ones, as the pair we encounter appear to be unique in some way, but you never know. If they really did each have a drake of that caliber, that would be fearsome indeed. Lothric isn't just made up of knights though, they also have the scholars and priestess, together making up the three pillars. And of course the hunters who take the role of assassin here, as with Kieran's Lordblades and Alant's spies. Let's be generous and also grant them the Cathedral Knights, as we encounter several in Lothric Castle. And we can't forget the Winged Knights, can we? Larger than their skinny cousins, they seem to have brute force to make up for numbers, judging from what we see of the civil war that plagued Lothric Castle. One Winged Knight is invariably surrounded by dozens of his slimmer comrades, but whilst they, or at least their golden overseers, use miracles, they don't seem to be riding drakes. But the slim knights and the priests do make a very good combo, as I'm sure you have encountered in Lothric Castle. A good start, but Lothric doesn't really have any commanders that we know of, outside of Prince Lorien, and men are only as good as those who lead them. And whilst Lorien is by no means a pushover, how does he hold up against the likes of Artorius and Raim? We do have the Dragonslayer armour, I suppose, but Lothric is sorely lacking in named commanders. But, you know, let's be generous and give them the Crystal Sage, at least, as well, so they have at least 2 commanders. As for their leader, whether it's Aceros or Lothric, I believe this would be the weakest both in gameplay and lore. Lothric is a sickly lad after all, and even if you turn Gwyn into parry bait, he'd still put up more of a fight than Lothric, I expect. Whilst the prince has powerful magic, he is nearly defenceless. Why, if he ever met Havel, it'd be like when Alfred found Annalise. Every inside on the outside. And it occurs to me that I forgot to mention Havel when I was talking about the commanders of Anor Londo. But yes, this Havel and his giant hammer. So there you have it, the 4 great kingdoms, but which would prevail? Of course, there are an infinite number of variables here. Are they all fighting in one huge war? Is it one against the other? And we tally up wins, losses, etc. Please do share your thoughts in the comments below, but here are my opinions. If we consider each army based solely on their troops and ignoring their commanders and generals, and I'm not going to go super in-depth on this and be like, well, the cavalry can flank the infantry and blah, you know? I'm not going to go super in-depth. But I think Drang Lake is probably the victor here. Certainly none of them are jokes to be scoffed at, but Vendrick had the most vested interest in his army, and it really shows. Out of all the kingdoms, we know for certain that Vendrick was building an army and put a lot of resources into his army. Of course, the Giants gave them a pretty good whipping at Cardinal Tower, but then the Giants in Dark Souls 2 are rather an anomaly. I don't think the Drang Lake forces would have any particular issues against, say, Boletaria. Against Lothric? Well, against the Knights, not so much, but dragons flying around would probably be rather nasty. But then we have to consider that Lord Aldir has done extensive research on dragons, or at least their remains, not to mention the fact that the Dragon Riders have very powerful bows. At the same time, I think Lothric would be the hardest win for Drang Lake, solely because of those Dragon Riders. Depends on how many there are, you know? It could go either way. Anor Londo is a different matter entirely. You might be thinking, Anor Londo has giants in its army, and giants creamed Drang Lake somewhat. That is very true, but they aren't the same giants, and Vendrick's army is outfitted to fight giants. We also have to consider that the giants only ever fought against the weakest of Vendrick's forces in Dark Souls 2. They only ever got as far as Cardinal Tower, right on the outskirts of Drang Lake. They never fought Primal Knights or Stone Soldiers and all these other nasty things in the castle. But what about the Silver Knights? Whilst they are probably individually stronger than even the Royal Guards, the Drang Lake army has the advantage of versatility. Again though, it's such a close thing, you know? If Anor Londo and Drang Lake fought 10 times, I think Drang Lake would win 6 times. You know, it would be so close that you can barely give the win to one or the other, but that's how I think it would go. And what if we consider just the generals though? Well, Lothric definitely gets creamed here. Even Kieran would probably be able to take out Lothric, and she's probably the second weakest of these general types. They have virtually no named figures that we know of in Lothric, and even Lothric and Lorien together would probably only be able to win against Alant, I feel. Lorien has practice in slaying demons after all. And what about Boletaria? We simply don't know enough about their best knights. We know that Bior is quite a doughty fighter, and the Tower Knight is intimidating, but I don't think he'd stand a chance against anyone, really. Penetrator is another matter. He might well be able to go toe-to-toe with Raim and Artorius, some of the best swordsmen that we know of. But Anor Londo and Drang Lake have the numbers once again. We know nothing about Sign, other than the fact that he died abruptly to the Giants. He was brave and loyal, but those aren't traits that help you win. Raim and Velstart are both extremely powerful though. Can you imagine? Ornstein, Artorius, Kieran and Goth facing off against Raim, Velstart, Throne Defender and Watcher. Wouldn't that be a battle to see? It's so very hard to even guess at an outcome. We know that Velstart is stronger than Raim, or at least we can assume Velstart is stronger than Raim because Velstart defeated Raim. It's entirely possible that he defeated him by bonking him on the head with a bell when he was sleeping though, so maybe not even that. But personally, I believe Kieran and Goth would be weaker than any of the Drang Lake side, but Artorius and Ornstein probably have the edge over, well, any of them. But then we also have to consider that Velstart is able to use Dark, occult magic, at least when we fight him in the crypt, which most of Gwyn's side would be weak to. Actually, all of Gwyn's side are weak to darkness. I'm very conflicted. In the end though, I think I need to give the edge to Gwyn's 4 knights. Although I do think people tend to overlook Velstart. As far as lore characters go, I think he's extremely powerful. But what about Gwyn and Vendrick? One-on-one, I think Gwyn would win. Gwyn would win. I do believe that, like Velstart, Vendrick is probably insanely powerful in his prime, but it isn't so much that Vendrick is weak, he just isn't the Sunlight King, with the most powerful of all Lord Souls. Granted, if you look at it from just a gameplay perspective, Hollow Vendrick would whoop Husk Gwyn, but that's one-on-one, and it's just because Vendrick has a gimmick, a mechanic to him where you need the souls to whittle down his defense. But that's one-on-one, and I think it's only fair that we consider Nishandra, a fragment of Manus and Vendrick. In that case, I think Gwyn would be in trouble, even if Gwyndolin popped up and did some rubbish magic. But of course, I know what you're thinking, I've overlooked something here, and it's not Seath, because Seath is okay, but he's not really a fighter, and if anyone finds his magic crystals and bops them, he's done. He's done. But the Nameless King, should we include him with Anor Londo's forces? Well, yeah, I think that would be fair, but having Gwyn and the Nameless King versus Vendrick and Nishandra, well, that could go either way. Gwyn and the Nameless King are probably more powerful, they would have a higher power level if you looked at them with your scouter, but there's the type weakness, because Nishandra is a Shard of Manus, and she is all darkness and humanity and the like, and Gwyn and the Nameless King are weak to that. So I suppose it comes down to, does that type weakness give them enough of an advantage to overcome the disparity in power? It's like, I don't know, a level 50 water Pokemon fighting a level 70 fire Pokemon. Does the water one win? Maybe. I've not played Pokemon in ages, so I don't know. The Force King Alant is fairly powerful, but I still believe he would lose to Gwyn, Vendrick and the Twin Princes. Maybe against Vendrick he would stand a chance, and maybe even be able to win against Vendrick, but again, we know so little about Vendrick in his prime when he was human properly and not a hollow. The Twin Princes though, I don't see them standing a chance against Gwyn. They would get toasted, nor Vendrick unless they got hold of some giant souls. Yorm would be a very different matter because Yorm is probably pretty damn powerful from a lore perspective. Gwyn is presumably so powerful that even with Vendrick's 32 times defense, he would still take huge damage from Sunlight Spears and the like. And just to reiterate, because once wasn't enough, Gwyndolin is a weak source. On a more serious note, whilst he does have powerful illusions, there's a reason he uses illusions. Gwyndolin is frail, and as we go into Eisen territory of illusions, they're not going to do much. Well, there you have it. What if we throw it all in together? I think the ratings would be as follows. Drang Lake in first place, Anor Londo very close behind, then Lothric, and finally Boletaria. But you know, there are very good arguments for all 4 kingdoms. Goth tells us how many knights fell to bring down even one dragon. and Lothric has an entire order of Sunbro Knights riding dragons, or drakes. But how do they compare to ancient dragons? Maybe Anor Londo's Silver Knights would obliterate every other kingdom with a volley of sunlight spears. Maybe Boletaria's soul arts are enough to crush the opposition. I could definitely be persuaded either way. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time for more weird crap like this. Take care.